On this Wednesday night, new problems for old schools. The anxiety in the air about ventilation systems.
Systems might not be up to par.
I have a classroom has no windows.
As BC announces a gradual return to class. The Democrats' new duo.
Kamala knows how to govern. She knows how to make the hard calls.
The monumental magnitude of Joe Biden choosing Kamala Harris as his running mate.
They were definitely in a new era.
And deadly derailment. A rare tragedy in rural Scotland.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. While teachers shuffle around desks, rework timetables, and stock up on masks ahead of September, there is one big part of the back-to-school conversation which educators are worried about: ventilation. In Toronto, a mock setup showing what 35 kids in a class would look like. Difficulty distancing is one thing, but air circulation is another, especially inside and especially in older schools that lack proper ventilation systems. Right now, windows and doors can be kept open, but teachers worry about what happens in the winter. Heather Yourex-West reports on the issue causing concern from coast to coast to coast.
With just weeks to go until his kids head to class, David Stalker is worried.
As a parent, you have all the same concerns. How do you keep the kids separate enough that they don't get sick themselves, but also bring sickness back into families?
He worries his children and students won't be able to physically distance in crowded classrooms. But depending on the age of the school, there could be additional risks.
That would be the one concern, is that older buildings might have been designed to a different standard. But also, if they're not maintained all that well, the HVAC or the heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems might not be up to par.
The virus is spread by droplets that can linger in the room if air is not properly circulated. It's why health officials have recommended we spend time with others outside when possible. Opening doors and windows can help get air moving, but in many Canadian classrooms, that's just not possible.
We know that that's the case in many, many schools. In some cases, windows are literally painted shut and cannot be opened.
My drama room, for instance, in my classroom at my school, has no windows in it because it is, in fact, it's a drama space, right? And so that would be a concern if I had students in there.
It's why advocates are calling on school districts to make sure their facilities are ready.
The funding given to maintain systems in schools is very low, so the work probably hasn't been done as well as it could be. So I'd be very concerned as the weather gets cooler and people move indoors.
Calgary's Board of Education says it's currently reviewing the ventilation systems at its facilities across the city. One more item on a long list of things to do to prepare for classes amid COVID-19. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
So you can understand why parents are agonizing over whether or not to send their children back to class. A top child psychiatrist at BC Children's Hospital says when safety is on the line, school is less important. It's a perspective that runs contrary to official public health guidelines in that province. Today, officials there revealed students will be returning to classrooms 2 days later than originally planned. Catherine Urquhart is following the developments for us. Catherine, tell us about the gradual restart to schooling there.
That's right. Well, after weeks of pressure from the opposition, from teachers and from parents, we're finally learning when kids in BC will be returning to the classroom. BC's Education Minister announcing today that while teachers will return on September the 8th, kids won't go back until 2 days later on the 10th. Why the 2-day delay? Well, it's also that teachers can get used to the new safety protocols before kids are back on site. For some parents, the delay, of course, will bring some childcare challenges, but most are fully embracing any and all efforts to keep our kids safe. Efforts that could even include more outdoor learning.
One size does not fit all. We all understand that. But we also understand that it's fundamental to reestablishing a normalcy within our communities, that we have safe places for our kids to be so they can learn and grow and socialize and do all the wonderful things that children do.
Another question in recent weeks has been the use of masks. BC's Education Minister now saying that masks will play a significant role in the return to school. However, they will not be required in the classroom, only when physical distancing cannot be maintained. It's all part of the new normal as kids here in BC return to school. Back to you.
Thanks, Catherine. Biden-Harris 2020 has begun. The presumptive Democratic presidential running mates appeared together for the very first time. Joe Biden saying Senator Kamala Harris will show young girls, especially black and brown girls who feel overlooked, that they too can one day lead the country. But as Jennifer Johnson reports, President Donald Trump, true to form, is already making personal attacks against Biden's historic pick for VP.
The Biden-Harris team has made it official, launching their bid for the White House. The Democratic ticket says they want to restore the soul of the nation.
Kamala, as you all know, is smart, she's tough, she's experienced, she's a proven fighter for the backbone of this country, the middle class.
We don't have to accept the failed government of Donald Trump and Mike Pence. In just 83 days, we have a chance to choose a better future for our country.
Senator Kamala Harris, the daughter of a Jamaican economist and a cancer researcher from India, is the first black and first Asian American nominee for vice president.
It is, in a sense, the American story. Immigrants who come here, who work hard, who raise their two daughters to think that there were no limits to what they could achieve. I think that's a story we will all look up to.
When you commit
Despite Harris clashing with Biden over his Senate record on race segregation during the Democratic presidential debates.
And that little girl was me.
The two mended fences. Many political experts and voters believe she's the person who can help Biden win in November.
She lifts up so many communities and so many women. When I heard it, I literally had to pull the car over and I cried. It was just, you know, such a huge historic thing that's happened.
U.S. President Donald Trump has often criticized the first-term senator, especially after her intense questioning of Judge Brett Kavanaugh during his Supreme Court nomination hearings.
That was just a horrible thing, the way she was, the way she treated now Justice Kavanaugh. And I won't forget that soon.
Harris spent grades 7 through 11 in Montreal, where her mother taught at McGill University. She has taken on big banks as California's Attorney General and criminal justice reform in the U.S. Senate. Now her sights are set on the White House, and if elected, Harris would become America's first female vice president. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
There is another woman making waves in the 2020 election race, but for very different reasons than Harris. Her name is Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she's a vocal proponent of the far-right conspiracy theory movement.
They are terrified because I'm going to be their worst nightmare. Woo!
Greene won the Republican nomination in Georgia's congressional primary last night, and she stands a good chance of winning her staunchly conservative district come November. She's known for making racist, anti-Semitic, and Islamophobic remarks. Greene also promotes QAnon, a baseless conspiracy theory that alleges a deep state plot against President Trump. To our nation's capital, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was not at a rare summer sitting of the House of Commons in Ottawa today. He's on vacation, and the Bloc Québécois leader wants him gone for good. Yves-François Blanchet issued a public ultimatum saying he will try to trigger a fall election if the Prime Minister, his Chief of Staff, and his Finance Minister don't resign over the We Charity student grant controversy. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson joins us now with more. Mercedes, this is a lot of talk, but how likely is it to happen?
It is, Farah. It's a lot of political bluster from the BQ leader today, but the threat of an election is mostly just that, an empty threat unless he can find other opposition parties that back the bloc. Before we dive into how likely that is to happen, take a quick listen to what the BQ leader told reporters this morning.
Our point is that as one important voice for Quebec, we observe that this government might not be worthy of our trust anymore.
Now, other opposition parties have been critical as well, but in order to trigger an actual election and bring down the minority Liberal government, the BQ will need them to vote against the government. Here's the math on how that could work. Take a look at the House of Commons. The Liberals have 156 seats in the House. The Conservatives are probably the most likely opposition party to back the bloc if they went ahead, but even if you combine those two party seats, you still only have 153 MPs. That's not enough to topple the government. You'd need 4 more MPs from other parties to be on side to bring down the Liberals. And even if the Conservatives aren't a sure thing, and they're not at this point because they don't have a leader. We talked to Erin O'Toole's campaign, Leslyn Lewis's campaign, and Peter MacKay's campaign. They all told Global News that their candidates are focused on winning the leadership race right now before they think about other polls. That puts the NDP into the power player seat, but they've got low polling and low fundraising lately, which means they're unlikely to trigger an election.
We don't think it's an appropriate thing right now to be trying to position for an election when we're in a pandemic, people need help, and we've been successful so far in bringing about our vision for a more compassionate response to COVID-19.
Now, the Green Party told Global News they also believe an election during a pandemic would be irresponsible, and it's unlikely that the two independents, former Liberals Jody Wilson-Raybould and Marwan Tabbara, would be the ones to bring down the government. So while there's lots of shouting about criticism for accountability and what Justin Trudeau must and must not do, it doesn't seem there's a lot of political will to take the risk of going to the polls.
All right. Mercedes, let's go back to the Conservatives for a second, because Leader Andrew Scheer rose in the House of Commons today, and this is likely his last time as opposition leader. What was that moment like? A little unceremonious. I mean, typically when you have a leader stepping down, you have a lot more people getting up and giving speeches, but this was not a typical day in any way. We're not normally sitting here in the middle of August with the House sitting. We could still hear more from Andrew Scheer, but it won't be in the House as he steps down and we wait to find out who the next Conservative leader is. Farah? Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa, thank you. To Canada's busiest highway next, the 401, where a flying wheel hit a car and killed the 24-year-old driver. Police say a pickup truck was towing a trailer during the morning rush hour when a tire flew off the trailer, smashed into the car that was traveling in the opposite direction. Ontario police investigate about 150 wheel separation incidents every year in the Greater Toronto area. A deadly train ride in Europe. Coming up, the trip along Scotland's scenic countryside that turned tragic. At least 3 people are dead after a passenger train derailed in northeast Scotland and caught fire. It jumped the tracks in a hilly area with one car tumbling down an embankment. Rescue efforts were hampered by the steep terrain and dense woods. The train's driver is believed to be among those killed. 6 others were hospitalized with non-life-threatening injuries. The suspected cause of the derailment is a landslide caused by heavy rains there. Efforts to stop an environmental disaster off Mauritius may be at a turning point. The island nation's prime minister says most of the fuel has now been removed from a stranded tanker that struck a coral reef in late July. It's believed as much as 1,000 tons of oil has already spilled from the vessel since it began cracking last week. New satellite images show the extent of the spill as more oil washes onto the ecologically sensitive coastline. The government intends to seek financial compensation from the carrier's Japanese owners. Beirut's port has partially reopened just over a week after the deadly explosion there. Lebanon's caretaker economy minister says 12 out of 16 cranes are now operating to secure goods for local markets. Container shipping is crucial to the country because Lebanon imports nearly 85% of its food. Work is underway at the port to clean up the destruction left behind by the blast. At least 170 people were killed and more than 6,000 injured when a warehouse filled with ammonium nitrate caught fire last week. In Belarus, women are rallying in the capital to protest a brutal police crackdown that left hundreds injured and thousands detained. The protest began 3 days ago, challenging election results that extend the 26-year rule of the country's authoritarian leader. Police responded with unusual force, using tear gas, stun grenades, water cannons, and rubber bullets. But women are now joining forces to protest as officers are more hesitant to use force against them. Cold case still ahead, the suspected source of New Zealand's latest COVID-19 outbreak. New Zealand's largest city, Auckland, is back in full lockdown. The restrictions were brought in today after the country recorded 4 new cases of COVID-19. New Zealand had gone 102 days without recording a locally transmitted case. Contact tracing is currently underway, but as Crystal Goomansingh explains, the source of the outbreak has baffled health officials.
We know how to beat this, but we also know we don't need to look far to see what it can mean if we don't get on top of it. We have a plan, and now is the time to follow it.
The plan is simple. Get tested, use the track and trace app, and stay home. At noon Wednesday, Auckland went back into lockdown.
Probably is the right decision, yes. I think we should, until we sort out how far it's spread in the community.
The new cases include a family of 4. One of them works for a cold storage company. New Zealand health officials are looking at frozen freight as a possible transmission route. According to the British Columbia Centre for Disease Control, similar coronaviruses have been shown to survive in refrigerators and freezers for weeks, and it's likely the new virus can also persist in cold environments. We do know the virus is spread through droplets of an infected person. If another individual comes in contact with those droplets or an infected surface, they can become ill.
There are also an additional 4 probable cases who are people with symptoms linked to the 4 community-based cases we talked about last night and earlier this morning. All of these probable cases are awaiting test results.
Until this week, life had pretty much gone back to normal. The country has just over 1,200 COVID-19 infections. New Zealand has been able to keep case numbers in check through aggressive virus elimination measures.
Very worried. Hopefully things will be okay, but yeah, very glad that the government has moved quickly. It's the right thing to do.
The lockdown for roughly 1 million people will be in place until Friday, when the country's resurgence plan will be reassessed. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Meantime, nearby Australia has recorded its deadliest day since the pandemic began. 21 deaths were reported in the last 24 hours, and all of them happened in the hard-hit state of Victoria. The country has also recorded its biggest daily rise in COVID-19 infections in 3 days, with more than 400 new confirmed cases. The bulk of them are linked to an outbreak in Melbourne. Australia's second-largest city remains under a strict lockdown. If you thought outdoor concerts were a thing of the past, take a look at this. The first large-scale, physically distanced concert happened in the United Kingdom yesterday. British musician Sam Fender headlined. 500 platforms were positioned 2 meters apart to ensure fans can enjoy live music and adhere to safety guidelines. Also perfect for those who feel anxious in large crowds. Only 5 people were allowed in each penned-off area. When Biden picked Harris, next, will this presidential pair make history or repeat it? In November, Americans may elect the first female vice president of the United States. We've been here before. The excitement, the build-up, the genuine belief that history for women could be made. But life had other plans. Our Eric Sorensen was at both national conventions that nominated the last 2 female vice presidential nominees. He says this time's different.
Walter Mondale beat Joe Biden to the punch by 36 years.
I looked for the best vice president, and I found her in Jerry Ferraro.
Geraldine Ferraro was hailed as a breakthrough in American politics, the first woman on the presidential ticket of a major U.S. party.
The issue is not what America can do for women, but what women can do for America.
It was exciting and bold, but America wasn't ready. Mondale Ferraro suffered an historic drubbing by the incumbent ticket, Ronald Reagan and George Bush.
Governor Sarah Palin.
24 years later, just the second woman VP nominee.
They say the difference between a hockey mom and a pit bull? Lipstick.
Again, the excitement was real, but once more, short-lived. In hindsight, Mondale and McCain had each thrown caution to the winds, putting a woman on the ticket to energize flagging campaigns that seemed destined to lose. This is different. Joe Biden was and is in a strong position to win. Adding Kamala Harris, a woman of color, is not the gamble it once would have been.
It's not a Sarah Palin gender pick. It is a substantive candidate who will partner with Biden.
It will be historic because history has been harsh towards women in U.S. presidential politics. Seldom seen, never victorious. There have been 48 U.S. vice presidents.
Look at all these vice presidents of the past. Is there one black person? No. Is there one woman who served as vice president? No. And the whole history of the vice presidency doesn't mirror our glorious diversity.
To replenish the Social
Such a
Security
nasty
trust.
woman. And attitudes of sexism still exist. Hillary Clinton faced them, and so will Kamala Harris.
She was nasty to a level that was just a horrible thing.
But the polls suggest 2020 is a turning point. Biden at 77 may be a one-term president, paving the way for more history to be made.
Not only did he pick a vice presidential nominee, but he probably also picked the frontrunner for the 2024 Democratic nomination. And that it's a woman of color is a big deal. We're definitely in a new era.
A new era in American politics that's been a long time in coming. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
And that's Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Farah Nasser. Tonight's Your Canada is this shot of the hammocks along the Halifax waterfront. If you'd like to share your Canada with us, email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Have a good night.